flow and that idea that actually there's enlightened self-interest in helping people to prosper. It's actually an act of worship to work.
Yes.
Yeah.
There's a philosophical principle there that to be productive is actually to honour who you are as an individual.
Ultimately, this is not going to last. And the same thing we're living through now, once everything's at the top, it's not going to be long when people say, Mum, I can't buy a house. So I can't buy a house. I can't have a meaningful job. And effectively, the older generation has taken everything from the younger generation, and that is not sustainable.
But the reality is, business leaders in the 1960s or 70s or whatever, or back through history, who didn't earn 300 million a year, had perfectly comfortable lives. They were perfectly well fulfilled. These telephone number salaries haven't actually benefited society in any way.
The Manna Journey is the catalyst for change in our world. It's a consistent source of truth for the next generation and current leaders. Our mission is to change the world by reframing our current governance, by using ancient wisdom to solve modern problems, and by shaping innovative new businesses to have a culture of pursuit of purpose.
This is an episode of the Manna Journey created by Phillip Ullmann. The Manna Journey is a whole new concept in economics, in business and in governance, where we take the wisdom of the Bible to create innovation in business and indeed then push that through to a change in our society through good governance. Today, I'm going to be talking to Phillip himself and, of course, a great businessman and a friend of ours, I think, Suhail Mirza. So take it away. When you're talking about the Manna Journey, one of the things that it seems to me just inherent within everything that you've said so far is that it's not just the money, it's that you and I are going to be bonded together as a community. You're going to look after my needs. Now, by the way, I'm going to look after yours as well, because if I lose my job and you give me some money, I'm going to cut your grass or paint your house or whatever. But it's that direct connection, it's that community element
to do
that
it.
really comes through.
You don't, I'm not forcing, if I give you money, people need to feel that they're contributing. No one wants to be received. Therefore, charity by itself is not the ideal. We have to make sure, and that's why the benefit system is dangerous, because it ends up with people, unfortunately, I don't blame them, but they end up not being responsible because the culture is such that, which we saw in recruitment as well, that minimum wage doesn't pay more than they could earn on benefits not working. So there's a disincentive to actually work, which is crazy, but it has to be resolved, and therefore they end up earning more, but you doing nothing. And that, as we discussed before, ends up with people not living healthy lifestyles, not looking after themselves, not looking after their family, and not having this concept of responsibility.
And it just feels like, I suppose, to drive it further, it just feels like there's a wedge. You know, when somebody's on benefits, there are people who could help them in the community, but instead we almost just give them the money, pat them on the head, and let them drink themselves to death.
Well, I think whatever they do, I think that Philip's point earlier is about that flow and that idea that actually there's a enlightened self-interest in helping people to prosper. In the Abrahamic traditions, as I understand them, it's actually an act of worship to work productively.
Yes.
Your labour is
6 days you shall work, and the 7th day it's right from the beginning.
There's a philosophical principle there that to be productive is actually to honour who you are as an individual. And taking it out of a faith-based system, I've referred earlier to Jeremy Rifkin's work, that is a very influential thinker and political theorist, and he's talking about a collaborative age, a covenant. He uses the word covenant.
So the concept of lending is different. I think we need to look. So let's break down the two components. We've got money, which you've now decided is linked to a gold standard and is flowing rapidly every single day. No credit in that system about needs, about a job, and therefore, if I've got money and I look at my local town, I see, this road needs to be repaired, or this, we need a hospital, we need a school. You will start to focus on the needs of the community, of your brothers, which is a concept in both Islam and Judaism and Christianity.
And can I just interrupt there? Because I feel at the moment you sit there and you think to yourself, well, if I had all this money, why would I give it away? But under your system, under the Manna Journey, the asset you want is a vibrant community, because that is what builds up your life. That's what looks after you in your old age. And therefore, having piles of money in the bank, numbers on a page, is not the thing you would want. What you would want is to build up your community. Sorry, Philip.
The flow. You want to create the flow. And therefore, if somebody has no food, of course you're going to give them. But the way the Bible says it is, it should be by way of a pledge. They come back to you every night and explain to them, okay, have you looked for work? What skills have you got? What jobs do they need to be? And that regular daily focus on meeting everyone's needs is a completely transformational way. Then if the person unfortunately doesn't have a job and you have to pay them, they may be ill, and therefore that you may therefore give them stuff which effectively in the Bible is going to be by way of a loan. That has to be without stress as well. So therefore that's why you've got the concept of no interest, which means that it won't grow beyond what you provide them. But there's also debt forgiveness, which is very, very important. I'm not sure where Islam sees that. But
No, it's the same principle. The principles of the sacred law, it has to be an equitable distribution. There's also principles in Islamic finance. If you're in business partnership with somebody, if they run into problems, you're obligated to help them and support them out of that.
Okay.
So this goes back to debt forgiveness, I think, is now...
it's core. That's what we have to do. I mean, we know there's this...
How does that work with mortgages, though?
So the bottom line is debt forgiveness in the Bible is it's a communal event. It's every 7th year.
Yeah.
Right, 7th year. And the message is let go. You may be responsible for assets, but don't use it to impoverish, to enslave other people, which is what happened in Egypt.
Yes.
The money is hold on, and it eventually results in slavery. Yeah, and in fact, the phrase that Pharaoh uses is the anti-Sabbath, the anti-letting go. The Sabbath concept is simple: let go. Don't use assets and control them to enslave and make people your slaves. And therefore, that's why we have to start to develop a lending system, which is, you might call it investment, but it's not for more money. It's to cause the flow, and it's not to enslave. It's to enable the flow to operate and to ensure that people don't become slaves.
In the Manna Journey, as you envisage it, is that kind of on a small scale? Because I could see a really easy way of setting up banks if they're effectively like credit unions, local to a particular area. Everyone puts a little bit of money in, and then it builds things in the community. Is that the way it would work?
Yes, it's got to be local, because you got to see people and understand people. I was talking to Imogen Sinclair about this, and her father's a clergyman. He said the clergy are good people to actually administer the kinds of lending system that we need, because they know what people are doing. They know if people are taking the mickey. They know, and they can ensure that the idea is not to make people dependent. The idea is to make them work and provide a meaningful...
Because the other thing is, when you've got all of these banks operating via computer systems, operating via credit checks, it's very difficult when somebody gets into financial difficulty to do anything other than just take the house. And so the whole thing is self-perpetuating, isn't it?
And you remember banks a generation or two ago were seen as utilities. They've now become very, very different. And so this journey that Phillip is proposing and the Abrahamic faith and the principles of equity will be resisted, because there's a lot of vested interest. And I don't think that should be a barrier, because 60 years ago you were regarded as a little bit of a freak if you started talking about environmentalism, and now you've got the oil companies saying, look, we're green credentials, green credentials. So I don't think this should stop us. But we should be aware that it's iconoclastic. It needs to be changed.
I mean, it's interesting you say that, because of course people forget the extent to which banking has changed. People forget the extent to which money has become a commodity. People forget the extent to which housing is no longer about housing, it's about investments. People forget that that's a new thing.
Well, some of us grew up with our archetypal bank managers, Captain Mannering.
Yeah.
And now it's somebody sitting in somewhere in Wall Street.
It's absolutely true.
Completely different.
My own personal experience was that it was a relationship.
Yes. Yeah.
And they would back you if they trusted you. Once you're talking about numbers in a computer and people in the cities that have no relationship, their relationship is gone, and the system doesn't work. Things don't flow.
One of my friends said to me that when he was a young man, he bought a printing press, probably I think in the 70s, and he said in those days, when you walk down the high street, each bank was a different bank, right? And of course they still officially are today, but they all operate off the same system today, off the same credit checks and whatever. So there's no ability to offer a variety of options to people.
I think the Joseph story, and it will be the same in the Quranic principles, very much is anti the idea of any monopolies, because the opportunity for exploitation, banking is now concentrated in fewer and fewer monolithic organizations.
They have no purpose. They're allowed to do whatever they want with the money. The money is not being used to provide the means of employment or to provide food and clothing or protecting the planet. None of that features in the decision making about
it's the way that
making the loans.
It's the way that the pharaoh has gone from being somebody who's attempting to facilitate to somebody who is now just a parasite, just the biggest parasite of them all.
Absolutely right. You end up and living by yourself in a gated estate, completely disconnected from society, but you've got all the money in the world, but you haven't got any meaningful existence.
And it is notable that the people right at the top have locked themselves away. I mean, they don't walk around the streets high-fiving people who like them for what they've done.
And then what happens, of course, is a new pharaoh comes along and says, 1 minute, you've all been stitched up, and it ends up with genocide, it ends up with complete revolution, because ultimately this is not going to last. And the same thing we're living through now, once everything's at the top, it's not going to be long when people say, 1 minute, I can't buy a house, so I can't buy a house. I can't have a meaningful job. And effectively, the older generation has taken everything from the younger generation, and that is not sustainable. Eventually, you get a new pharaoh who says, no, enough's enough, let's change it.
But to go even further than that, I mean, we don't know about the next crisis and how damaging it would be. But, you know, the United Nations say that the 2008 financial crisis caused 1 million extra deaths from poverty. So you are sat there in your yacht thinking to yourself that by stockpiling all this money, I've got this, it's lovely, you know, this great cruising around the Caribbean, but 1 million people died because of the failure of my institutions.
Oh, the millions that are being killed by, if you're not focused on protecting people's lives and their livelihoods and the planet, you kill. It's very, very clear that's what happens.
And I think that principle of oneness is really important. All the Abrahamic faiths talk. I mean, in Islam, it's at the end of life, you are asked a number of questions, two in particular. How did you accumulate your wealth, and what did you do with it?
Yes.
And thirdly, what did you do with the knowledge that you'd acquired? So we don't have to have a faith tradition. I think the principles that Phillip has been pioneering now to reclaim traditional wisdom, the timing is right, because we're seeing the idea of oneness and connection and purpose and commonality. I think more and more people have no faith.
But do you see yourself
stop fighting each other? We've got to work together. Whatever the faith is or no faith, we're just fighting each other.
And that's over resources as well.
And it's not a natural being. We don't like fighting. People want to build relationships, but the system is almost forcing to fight.
As Suhail's just said, and you've just said, quite often it's resources. And what we're doing is we're battling over resources that actually none of us are benefiting from, or very few of us are benefiting from. But I just want to ask you this question. Do you see yourself as a trustee now of the businesses and the wealth that you have, or are you still in the mindset of being a businessman?
I don't think there's a distinction there.
Okay.
You know, that line is, if we accept the modern view around what economics means, I have always seen myself as somebody who has to be accountable for what I do, for my actions, for my wealth. And in terms of business, I believe it's not a zero-sum game. We can both win if we use a balanced approach. It doesn't mean that I want to take it. Phillip and I will know many businesses, men who shall remain nameless in our sector, who don't have that view. But ultimately, that's where everybody wins. We have to lift people to give them the opportunities to be productive contributors to society.
And we're not saying that we're not ambitious or we're not trying to do the best with what God's given us. We're just doing it for the sake of other people as well as our own family and society. And therefore, if we move away from rich lists of how many people got hundreds of billions to how many people are creating environments where hundreds of thousands and millions of people are living meaningful lives with the security of a home they're not going to lose, a job they're not going to lose, and a family and a community, then we start to channel those energies into cohesion and relationships.
And flourishing. They want to be flourishing, not just surviving.
But the reality is, business leaders in the 1960s or 70s or whatever, or back through history, who didn't earn 300 million a year, had perfectly comfortable lives. They were perfectly well fulfilled. These telephone number salaries haven't actually benefited society in any way.
Well, I think if you look at the stats from that period, the average wage of a CEO compared to their worker was of an order of some multiples. Now it's hundreds.
300. It's hundreds.
It's ridiculous, and that doesn't make any sense. And you're right.
It's yeah, it's crazy. We've lost focus on people and planet, basically, and it's become all about the I. And what we have to do is look at the manna, learn from the Manna Journey, recognize that we need to rethink about money and our relationship with money. We must understand money, go back to a gold-based or asset-based form of money that flows rapidly every single day from person to person and meets the needs and is local and starts to build community and separately build a lending system which is Islamic and Christian and Jewish, which is actually based on looking after the poor, looking after people, getting people into jobs, getting people the food they need, but not gifting it, not charity. Actually, the greatest form of charity is to enable somebody to earn their own living. And that's two changes. One, we've got to get cash right, and we've got to understand lending. Those two things are the principles of the Manna Journey.